Well, thank you so much for that introduction. It is so wonderful to be back in the great state of Texas. Woo! When they invited me, I'm like, really? I have to go back? Darn. But this is a very, very special place. And, you know, I pray for discernment all the time. And when I was sitting in Phoenix back, 2009, my boss was going on to work for President Obama, and I had to make a decision at that time, sort of where to go. Clearly, Janet was moving on to do great things. I had been with President Clinton before in the White House, and I thought, yeah, I could do that. I could go back into federal service. But I really prayed as to what is my path next? Is it really going back to the federal government? And what came to me very clearly was that I had to go to the grassroots level, that my calling was to serve directly with individuals that were serving youth. For some of you may not know this, when I was back in Arizona working for the governor there, I found my way to working around issues of poverty. And so the governor at the time was very popular, and I would always tell her, come on, governor, let's take that popularity around for a few rides around the block. And she did. She allowed me, actually, to put a focus on the homeless. We passed legislation that for the first time funneled money from the Arizona State Lottery to a fund to help fund homeless programs in Arizona. And I would drag her around. I would take her to domestic violence shelters so she could witness what was happening there. I also was able to take her to the juvenile detention centers, where I was there to help the girls understand that although they may have lost their way, that they could find their way moving forward. And so with that experience, I put her on a plane to Washington, D.C. with 20 of my colleagues, and I packed my bags and brought my very cute husband and cute son to San Antonio, Texas. Because as I researched, where could I go to really make an impact on youth in this country? There was one organization in the entire country that had the infrastructure, had the history, had people who clearly understood that this had a mission to serve girls in a very distinct and powerful way. And it was also built on a basis of love, charity, and a mission to a higher purpose. And so that's why I found my way to Girl Scouts. And that's why I came here to San Antonio, Texas. And what I learned working here with the fabulous people in this area, many of them are in the room today, volunteers who've given their life, heart, blood to this movement. Thank you for that. I learned a lot from them. I learned a lot from the staff. And it was clearly that we did not have to walk away from our faith to work in an environment these days, that actually we could combine those opportunities. Because at the end of the day, when we walk out of our house in the morning, we don't separate ourselves, right? And we clearly take those teachings and what drives us into our day-to-day work. Whether you're in government, whether you're in academia, whether you are in Silicon Valley, you are clearly working based on your passion and what you want to do for individuals. So when I found my path to New York City, I knew that there was a bigger calling. There was a reason why, at that point in time in my career, in my life, that I was now going on to serve at the national, international level. And through that process, I've met some amazing group of people, and many of them actually are in the room today. And I want to purposely recognize them. First, of course, I need to thank Bob McCarty, who was one of the first people that I met 3 years ago when I became the national CEO. Interestingly enough, within a month of my appointment, all of a sudden, these issues about Girl Scouts and Catholics and bishops all of a sudden came up. You know, I don't know why, but that was just my cross to bear at the time. And I went down to Washington, D.C. with our national board chair. Many of you know Connie Lindsay, who is a woman of great faith. And we went down to meet with Bob and with Kathy to understand why. Well, what was going on? And clearly, although we had been in partnership with the Catholic Church at that time, you know, close to 100 years, not quite yet, I learned more and more that actually we had people in Girl Scouts across the country who had been carrying the mantle, not only for Girl Scouting, but for girls who were Catholic and who wanted to, again, live both sides of their lives. And so I wanted to thank him publicly for his support and what he has taught me, what he's done on our behalf for Girl Scouting just in my short tenure. And that I will tell you, I've been in the throes of many political battles in my lifetime, in heated discussions on many different issues. And it is a rarity to find somebody who, in the thick of battle, when it is really dark, when everybody else has gone, and you look next to you and you look behind you and there's nobody standing there, it's very rare to find somebody who sticks with you in the hard times. And I can honestly tell you, in the last 3 years, every time I looked around, there was Bob. He and his team were there. I also want to thank, for their incredible support, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops and their Committee on Laity, Marriage, Family Life, and Youth, and for the bishops around the country who have supported Girl Scouts of the USA and their local councils. I also want to send a special thanks to Cardinals George and Dolan, to the many archbishops for their support, and interesting enough, when I had an opportunity, because I work, I'm in the Diocese of Newark, but I work obviously in New York City. And so I knew that my cardinal was Cardinal Dolan, right? So I'm going to go see the cardinal. And I will tell you, we had a lovely visit the first time I met him, and people were like, oh, you're going to go see Cardinal Dolan. So I get there, and I'm waiting, and all of a sudden I hear this great voice coming down the hall, and he sees me there, and he's like, "Are you Miss Chavez?" I said, "Yes, I am." And he's, "Come on in." Well, I've got to tell you, I think I had a 15-minute meeting with him. An hour later, his staff tried so hard to get us out, because within 30 minutes he ordered popcorn and Pepsi, and we were having a lunch, because he's a Boy Scout. Do you know that? Cardinal Dolan is a Boy Scout. So we traded stories of our scouting background and how he had grown up in Boy Scouts. And from that moment on, I clearly knew that there were a lot of people that clearly understood us because they had lived this path with us, that it wasn't this esoteric program, but that leaders across the country in the Catholic Church had actually grown up in scouting. So I want to spend a special thanks to Cardinal Dolan, because we've had a good time. He has presented me actually with a special medal at the Catholic Mass for Girl Scouts and Girl Scouting, Boy Scouting in New York City, and so he's a special friend. I also want to recognize a few people in the room today. Vicki Shep, where's Vicki? There's Vicki, of course. Thank you, Vicki. A wonderful partner in Orange County. Thank you for your support. Joan, Tracy, where's she at? Where's Joan? Joan, thank you. She helped us chair the Girls World Forum in Chicago. That was a lot of fun. Thank you for being there. Jackie Daniels, where's Jackie? Jackie. She's a former board chair of Girl Scouts of Louisiana East. I want to thank her for her tireless efforts on behalf of the work you're doing, especially with your Archbishop. Thank you for that. And of course, everyone at the National Catholic Committee for Girl Scouts and Campfire for your support of our troop leaders, our girls and volunteers. I'm also delighted that one of my colleagues is here today, actually two of them. Having been from the ranks of a local Girl Scout Council CEO, I have a good friend here, Diane Flanagan, who was my counterpart here in Texas. She's out of El Paso, and she is the Girl Scout CEO on Desert Southwest, Southern New Mexico, and West Texas. Yeah, she's got to cover several states because she's that good. So thank you, Diane, for being here. And also my good friend Linnell, who is your CEO for Girl Scouts in Austin, Texas. Linnell, thank you for being here. Very excited. So, I want to just, I'm not a theologian, so that's not what you're going to get here today. But what you're going to hear today is just my path, both as a daughter, as a wife, as a Catholic, and as a leader in this country, a little bit about my path and sort of where we're going together as servants in this country. For those of you who don't know, I was a Girl Scout growing up in Arizona. I'm sitting next to a fellow Wildcat. Bear down. Bear down. And it was a lot of fun growing up in Arizona. Again, clearly understood that as a girl, I had many opportunities. I grew up in, I think, an interesting conglomeration of talents. I didn't know I was poor because I was rich in faith. I was rich in love. And my parents were public servants. Many a night I would come down to the kitchen because I would be awakened by noise, and there they were. It was not uncommon to see my parents around the kitchen table, 10 o'clock at night, transcribing documents that had come in the mail, and neighbors who didn't speak English would come, and with government documents, my parents would sit down and translate these very complicated documents for their neighbors. My mother was an elected official early on in my life because she saw the inequities in the school system, and even though she hadn't been trained, she wanted to fight on behalf of youth in our community. And my dad has always given back in our community as well. And so for me, having also grown up with my grandmother who lived with us, she was of the generation where you prayed twice a day. We had an altar actually in the bedroom that we shared, and there was always a candle lit for either me or my older brother. And so it was a ritual. Grandmother always went to her room around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We were always in the front row of the church every Sunday. And for me, it seemed odd when I left Eloy and went to a bigger city that this is not what everybody did, and so I had always been able to sort of meld my lives of faith and public service. So when I went on into government, I knew that is something I had to continue. And lucky for me, I had leaders who allowed me to do that, including in Arizona. The individuals that reported to me worked on several different capacities and issues, but one woman in particular, her name is Janice Scott, was the faith advisor to our governor. And so my job was to work with her to ensure that every time we looked around, we had faith leaders surrounding the governor to give her insights and advice. And we hosted an annual prayer breakfast with the state legislature to ensure that our state leaders ensured that they had, again, an insight into what was going on in our faith communities. So when I came to Girl Scouts, I said, well, if government could sit down and have discussions and partner with faith leaders and faith organizations and countries, Girl Scouts can do that as well. And I was very happy that when we turned 100 years old as a movement, I was able to go back to our birthplace in Savannah, Georgia, where I clearly learned from the very beginning of our movement. Our founder, Julie Gordon Lowe, clearly understood that she had to partner with the local religious organizations in Savannah, Georgia. So when I was there in March of 2012, I was hosted by the local organizations who were the first troop leaders, the first troops of Girl Scouts, including some of the leaders of the local synagogue, the Jewish synagogue. And they had a whole history of the relationship between Girl Scouts and the Jewish faith in Savannah. I was hosted by the Methodists and the Episcopalians and the Catholics. And so, again, our leader was a true visionary. She not only knew we had to have a global footprint, but that we needed to allow our Girl Scouts to, again, live and breathe their faith every day. So when I received my training here in Girl Scouts in Southwest Texas, I got to see up close and personal all the awards that girls can earn in Girl Scouting. And what I loved even more was that we had a special program we recently launched a few years ago where girls could not only learn more about their own faith, but more importantly, they could learn about other people and their faiths. And I really believe at the end of the day, I think that's the power of Girl Scouting, that we have raised generations of women who understand that it's not just important to stand up to protect your rights and to espouse your ideals, but that it was important to also stand up for people's rights, to understand their religions, and to understand that everybody had an opportunity around the table. That we're all different, but at the end of the day, we need to come together to lead together in this country. So again, it doesn't surprise me that this has gone on for decades and decades. And I'm speaking to the crier here, right? Right? I am, because you, at the end of the day, have really turned to your faith during the last few years, when individuals across the country have created horrible rumors, falsehoods about our movement. And so I just want to take a moment to thank you for having the faith to stand up sometimes to really harsh critics who, even though they may think they're right, were clearly wrong. That there were times in your own local diocese when you, for many years, were sitting in church and then you found yourself having to defend your connection to this great movement. Thank you for doing that. Because I clearly have learned, at least in my faith path, that even when you feel you're in the right space, there are so many other people who are telling you you're wrong. And that's when your faith is tested. You know, I have this opportunity every Sunday to teach Catholic school class. Let me tell you, it's really hard teaching teenagers. Wow. And I recently, I've been moving up. I taught 5th grade, 6th grade, and this year I'm teaching 7th grade. And they are really smart. And I was teaching the Beatitudes a couple of Sundays ago. And we get to the provision about you need to love your enemies, you know. And we were pulling out pieces of the scripture, and somebody stood up and asked a question. And they said, you know, I don't understand. It clearly shows here in the Bible that we have to love our enemies. But how do I do that when these people are really mean? You know, and they say horrible things. Or even when they're not saying it directly to you, they're saying it to other people or they're posting on Facebook. And so how do I distinguish between what you teach me here every Sunday, Miss Anna, and what happens outside of this class? How do I live both? I don't understand that. I'm not strong enough. And so we got into these very huge sort of, again, religious discussions that even adults have a hard time. And how do you describe that to a 7th grader? When they clearly see in the country today what people who say that they're leaders in this country say really mean things about other people. When we have been at war against other countries, when clearly other human beings are killing other human beings based on what they believe in. And I found myself really challenged. How do I teach these kids? You know, as good Catholics, what we say and do on Sunday may not be what they see the rest of the week. And they really pushed me around this. They said, how can this be? How can we be true servants to these scriptures and stand back and allow people to do this? And the way I described it to them, it was the only way in my own simple mind that I could sort of bridge these two different worlds, is that it starts with us. It starts with us. And I think that's what I learned growing up from my grandmother and from my parents, that it was up to us. When the dialogue turned ugly, when people got up and either said racist remarks about other people that they clearly didn't understand, or they got up and made off-color comments about the poor because they didn't understand them, that it was up to us as individuals that believed in a higher being, that we had to stand in a space of love and of empathy, and that we had to grab the mic when it was really hard to do, and to stand up and say, on my watch, it will not happen. That I will be the one that will take the unpopular position to say what you speak is not truth. And I think that's why right here, those of you in the room today are being called to speak truth. You know, one of the scriptures I turn to, and for those of you who've known in my tenure the things I've had to stand for, there's a scripture that I turn to quite often that has given me solace many, many a time. It's Isaiah 54:17. Every weapon fashioned against you shall fail. Every tongue that brings you to trial shall prove false. This is the lot of the servants of the Lord, their vindication from me, oracle of the Lord. I have it on a little card, and let me tell you, it's pretty worn. And I constantly go back to this, every weapon fashioned against you shall fail. And I think that's what's happening across the country. Those of you of faith are having to stand back and allowing people, again, as I try to teach the kids, when they hit you on the cheek, you turn the other way, right? That you embrace your enemies because they do not know what they do. And I think that's why I keep praying this passage in particular, because I have to remember, even though people will raise a weapon of untruth against us, ultimately, at the end of the day, it is not really our job to create and fight that battle. It's actually our job to provide witness that we're resilient in the face of these weapons. And as Julie Gordon-Low quickly would tell us early on in our tenure in this movement, that girls are watching. They are watching how we react to people who provide criticism to us as Girl Scouts. Do we stand in a space of charity and empathy and say, let me spend some time. Why don't we sit down and let me actually explain to you what we stand for? People can post anything to a blog and people will believe it. Right? Here in San Antonio, when I received the calling to go to the national office, and the Monsignor on a Sunday called me up to the main altar because he wanted the whole congregation to provide a blessing to me, my husband, and my son. And we stood there, and I took communion that day, the whole thing. And after Mass, I'm standing there, and people are walking up to me. Oh, I'm so excited you're going on to be the National City of Gold. Blessings to you. At the end of the line, there was a man and a woman. And they come up to me, and they said, well, Miss Chavez, what are you going to do about this? All these horrible things you're doing with girls. Right? And they had all these ugly things to say about Girl Scouting. And I said to them, first of all, this is the house of the Lord. Why are you saying these things here? And they said, well, we don't know if you're a Catholic. And I said to them, did you not see me take communion? And they said, oh, people sneak it all the time. And I really had to say to myself, believe me, as a child, they had to drag me to church because I'd rather be out on my bike, right? Right? I mean, how many people sneak into church? Come on now. Sorry. Right? But that is the war we're going to be fighting, unfortunately. So I'd lay that out as truth. That right now, clearly, we have to work as Catholics to grow our faith, to deliver the message of this church, to make sure it resounds clearly. That our actions as Girl Scouts not only are true to our law and promise, but as Catholics, we emulate what we believe in. And it's really not up to us to really fight a battle of negative words, but to hold up a mirror of other people of faith and people even within our own church who are saying these things are untrue about Girl Scouting, and to bear witness that they can continue to say mistruths, but we will now stand for the truth. And so, again, I just wanted to thank you so much. You may have felt alone. You may have found that the Calvary wasn't coming, but it's here. Because your message is now resonating. And what I've seen just in 3 years has changed the dialogue within our own church, has changed the dialogue within the own diocese that you sit in, that I sit in. Because at the end of the day, I think it's part of a bigger dialogue happening in this country. And good people of faith are now standing up saying, it's enough. We've seen enough hatred, right? It's time to do something different in this country. And so that's why I'm excited. But I have to admit, my parents now have 3 altars. One in Phoenix, one in New Jersey, and now one that they've set up at my younger brother's house secretly. But as they pray every day, they share with me that it's okay. It's okay, Anna, because we're praying for you. We're praying for your discernment. And there are a lot of people out there who clearly see that with prayer, miracles happen. And I've seen that. In my short tenure, I've seen miracles happen. And I will continue to pray for you. I will continue to pray for our Girl Scouts. And I will leave you with one last prayer that I found when I was actually trying to teach that lesson, because I constantly search the web for scriptures that I can share with my kids in Sunday school. And I found one actually on the Conference of Bishops website that I now to have closely. It's a prayer. It says, Father, all-powerful and ever-living God, we praise and thank you through Jesus Christ our Lord for your presence and action in the world. In the midst of conflict and division, we know it is you who turns our minds to thoughts of peace. Your Spirit changes our hearts. Enemies begin to speak to one another. Those who were estranged join hands in friendship, and nations seek the way of peace together. Your Spirit is at work when understanding puts an end to strife, when hatred is quenched by mercy and vengeance gives way to forgiveness. For this, we should never cease to thank and praise you. Amen. Amen. Blessings to you.